Okay, it's 3 o'clock. I will call the City Commission study session to order, and I'll look at City Manager Mr. Scragg. I think you had some opening comments.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just as a little bit of background, I think commissioners from prior conversations, you're aware that we have an economic development incentive policy that was adopted by Resolution 91-4265. The reference to 91 indicates it was adopted in 1991. It's a little outdated. It includes some language about just calculation of tax abatements, whether that's through industrial revenue bonds or other means, based on levels of investment and based on employment. And those levels of investment certainly are outdated. So one of the things that was identified as the city looked at our approach to economic development and the formation of the Salina Community Economic Development Organization was tasking that group with reviewing incentives and recommending changes once they'd been established and had their executive director on board. That's something that they've taken up recently. Mitch Robinson, the executive director from the SCEDO, led that effort, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but he walked the board through kind of his research, and they've reached a conclusion and have a recommendation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mayor. If you want to put that up, Jacob, that'd be great. And I think you all have seen the chart, as I'll refer to it as. We started, it wasn't quite this time last year, but it was pretty close, to digging into the policy the city currently has, and then what our competitors and larger communities across the state. So we looked at the top 10 communities plus Hayes and Hutchinson to try to get a feel on what they're doing now, if they've changed policies recently. Going through that process, many of those communities like us had not touched their policy in many years. So we kind of put those to the side and kept looking at who is doing something maybe innovative or at least a little different. Former Mayor Davis, during one of the discussions when you had me up here, or I was up here, we talked about, this is something that you wanted to see, was some type of, I don't know if we actually used the word chart, but at least a process to kind of simplify the review process. So we think we've done that. I've got two of my board members here. Brian Richardson, who's now my incoming, just came in as chairman, and Jim Mays, who's now vice chairman. So they took part in the process. Make sure there's nobody else here. And we went through this, had a committee got formed to kind of, after we wrestled with it for several months and thought, okay, let's get a group together and sit down and really go into it. So if you all want to look at this, this is kind of what we've come up with, and I'll go through it. But we did look at Wichita, Sedgwick County really had the best format. So we won't say we totally stole it from them, but we were pretty close to taking their format and then modifying it to how we felt would be good for Salina. The community, one of the things that was talked about was we wanted to make sure that smaller companies had the opportunities that bigger companies had. A lot of times we get into these incentives, the big companies qualify easily, and if you think back over the last 2 years, the projects we've had, the big ones, Swans, Great Plains, those were very easy to confirm exactly what they had. Then you get into some of the smaller ones. We had GeoProbe recently. Those were ones that were a little bit more on the edge. But we got into this and looked at their format, what they've done. We looked at some of the communities in Johnson County. Some of the more urban areas had a 50% abatement, but those were more of a downtown, really didn't quite fit a more broader proposal that we needed to fit industry as well as other projects. So we kind of went by that one. Lawrence had done some targeting They had a 50% segment for some of their communities, some of their targeted areas downtown, industrial, special industrial areas. But if you go back into all of them, you kept coming back to they all had an out. They all had an out where you get the mega project, just like they announced in Wichita, I think it was Thursday night. You know, they've got one of the big projects, $1 billion project. So you never want to be able to have to lock yourself in my opinion. This is what I would recommend, and I am recommending, that we keep the flexibility there where we can go back for a big project if there was ever a reason to go and modify the incentives. And I think the city has done a good job of that over the years, being flexible and working with the projects that we've been fortunate to get over the next couple of years. So if you get into it, there are some kind of parameters, items that we felt like we wanted to continue to work with on our targeted industries. Aerospace is the most important one, we believe, based on the facilities we have at the airport, Kansas State, Salina, the facilities and programs they offer. So that's one of the ones. Agribusiness, distribution, warehousing, those two were also included. And then we had just advanced manufacturing, which is overall a pretty broad category, but it's something that most projects would fit into in some way. One of the things that was talked about before you all, we want to continue to look at a wage level of some sort, and we continued to do that. And we looked at the Kansas Department of Labor. They do an annual wage survey that's updated each December normally. I haven't seen the new one yet. We're keeping our eye out for that. But for 2022, our wage level was $17.67. So what we had discussed, talked about, was looking at 120% of that number, which right now would be $21.20. That would be our target. We would be shooting for to require those projects to get close to that without maybe possibly having some offset. But we felt like that was a reasonable number. You look at the companies we have here now and what they're having to pay for the going rate to get people in the door to work for them, that's not too far off. Some of it's even more than that. So we feel like that's a good number. Another item we had in here was for that unusual project that does generate sales tax revenue. So that was one of the items that was a plus if a project did create 30% of revenue outside of, I'm sorry, I'm getting these mixed up. This would be for projects that have outside sales, much like most of our companies push their products outside the region. So that would need to be 30% minimum. And then the but for, which is always an important an issue, that without this assistance, without the abatement, the project would not be able to go forward. So that's something that's always sometimes debatable, whether or not that we can really prove that. Oftentimes, we just have to take the word of the company that they would be looking elsewhere, or potentially it might not happen. So that's one of the last ones. And then, as part of trying to figure out exactly, okay, we're looking at new jobs. That's one of the key figures. And then investment. Those are the two main ones traditionally it's been done. But we wanted to look at some other opportunities for companies that maybe didn't have a large dollar amount. And we get into those along the bottom there, which hopefully you've had a chance to look at some of that. Proposed business is one of the targeted industries. We already touched on that. Sales tax receipts generated by the business are a certain threshold. So that's what I was trying to talk about a moment ago. So we need to work with the city manager and look at what kind of projects that would be, because oftentimes the projects we're involved with, we don't really see a huge sales tax number. Proposed business is synergy with existing businesses. You know, is there a connection there? Do they have do business with other companies within the community? That's a positive thing. And then the next one is business is already located in Salina. We felt like the community, you know, we want to support our existing companies, as I said earlier, so that would give a little higher number there, an additional boost. And what this does, that would go over on the far, not the far right, but the second right column. So that would be kind of like, think of bonus points. This would be kind of a bonus point situation that we would add based on whatever the project can generate. Impact on community resources. This is something that we often get working with the city manager on some of these projects. Oftentimes the question we get is water capacity. Do we have the water capacity? And we're fortunate we do have good capacity, but is it a type project that might use too much of the water? So we have to look at that in terms of job generation, your overall project. So that could be termed as a negative if it's a big user of water, or if it's a situation like a company is maybe generating their own power through their own network of turbines, or more likely solar panels, as we're seeing with some companies. You know, that could be an advantage. There could be a lot of different ways. And I did also skip over the other comments about community development benefits. That would be, in today's world right now with child care, housing, as you all well know, could there be a way that they could be bringing some funding? Maybe they could be assisting, like we have a company here currently that's working on a project here in Salina. So those things are all kind of what I would like to call just kind of wild cards, additional comments. If either of my two board members would like to throw out anything at this point, I don't.
Just that it's a guideline.
Yeah.
Only.
Yeah, very, very true. This is something that we feel like looking at it's a good guideline, but as you all know, the ultimate authority is you five folks sitting up there. So,
Is it okay for a question?
go ahead.
Mayor, were the other communities also looking at having businesses participate in things like childcare and housing? And I mean, I don't think it's done that much. I don't know for a fact, but it doesn't seem unreasonable to me to ask business to participate in some of those issues when they're become community issues and they
Right.
make them worse. So
well,
is that something that's coming or that we're seeing?
I think it is. We did see this in a couple other communities, Manhattan, Lawrence were two. You could expect that being college towns. They're kind of always on the cutting edge of some of that type of discussion. So I'm thinking, I was in Topeka for a meeting Thursday, and legislative projects, and the two items that were kind of on the top of the list were child care and housing. So it is an issue that everybody is seeing, and you all well know that it's a real problem for the whole state and much of the country right now.
Question. Is this on?
Push, the red light should be on.
Okay. I couldn't hear if it was on. On the number of new jobs, is this, those categories 5 to 25, is that over the life, of the abatement? Because if so, 5 just seems to be a very low floor.
It is.
And
It is.
in my mind, just throwing numbers out from projects I've seen, I was kind of thinking 15 or 20 would be the floor, unless that 5 is tied to a $500 million investment. I don't know how 5 people run $100 million each a year, but
Right.
if we had that business, we'd take it. But
Right. Yeah, it really can depend on when do you start counting? What are you starting initially? Is it 5, going to be 5? Or at the end of the 10 years, Is it going to be the 25 number? So that's something I guess we really need to zoom in a little closer on that one. And, you know, this, again, is a recommendation. So if we want to try to up that number, I think the concern was a lot of the smaller companies and a lot of projects in general, we may not be seeing job numbers like we used to. Maybe right now, we really don't want job numbers like we've seen. So some people are thinking, okay, investment, that's important. Maybe the job numbers are not as big a factor as it once was.
So are the jobs tied in at all with the investment amount? I mean, otherwise, I could see you know, if I'm trying to think of a business I could pick on without naming them. You know, a small store wants to expand to add 2 employees. I mean, there won't be any business in town that probably wouldn't qualify if you stretch this far
Well,
enough.
you got to think about, you know, we're talking normally manufacturing, so it's not going to be able to be a retail type project. So, you know, there could be some suppliers that maybe would have a few people, but I mean that is an issue that if we want to boost that number up a little higher. But I think generally we were trying to keep it where even the smallest type company that would qualify, even with only a couple jobs, they would be able to access the program.
Right, because what it amounts to, you know, with the city's or citizens' perspective is, you know, what value are we placing on each one of those jobs? You know, how much do we want to give up our tax revenues to create one job?
Right.
To your point, we want to remain flexible, and this is age automation, so very likely a facility with 2 or 3 employees could be fully automated and have a huge investment and generate quite an impact in product. So, yeah, I think flexibility is a key idea.
Rob
point,
Exline is on our board, and that was something that he brought up during the discussion is with the amount of technology that people are investing in, you see a higher dollar investment amount coming on these projects, but maybe not the job numbers. So I think that's a very good point.
Mr. Mays, you want to please come to
Come on up,
the,
Jim.
please come to the microphone. That way anybody listening can hear also.
And I wanted to add, we did not want to lock out the new entrepreneurs that were just starting a new business that we expect to grow. We didn't want to lock that out and not give them any consideration, so.
And just one other, with the investment, do you look at any point as far as future sales? I mean, you know, at the back end, when we do start collecting property taxes, et cetera, is that factored into the projections? Is that included in investment, or is that factored in anywhere along the?
No, not
Or
really.
is it assume that that investment will have just a certain dollar values for property tax?
Right,
down the
right.
road?
Well, we'll continue to have our Wichita State will continue to do their impact analysis on every project that like you'll hear a little bit later today. So, you know, that'll show us what the long-term impact will be.
Commissioner Longvine?
I might comment on Commissioner Davis' question about the job creation. So I got a little update yesterday on Schwann's of where they're at in terms of numbers, and kind of feel like they're about where they expected to be at this point. And now they're pushing for the additional people once everything gets up and running. And as I think these items we're going to hear today is 6 jobs, which not impressive. But I think they got to start somewhere and build on that. You're not going to start out being full strength, and hopefully the businesses can grow. So I think that's their goal. Back to the child care. You talked about that being a critical issue and topic.
It is.
Can you give us an update on what's going on with that?
I can. probably can't name names, but we do have a couple projects, companies that are looking at being very involved in a childcare facility for their employees. I don't think it's been talked about publicly, so I don't really want to say who that is right now, but it is going to be a 50 to 60 potential slots that company will be able to have. And then we're working on putting a meeting together to bring all the parties together. I mean, this has gotten to be an issue that every time we meet, it's on our discussion point. County, same thing. Tim with the airport and the companies out there are all involved. Salina Tech, you know, they have a new program. It's a little bit less than a year now where they're training people that want to be involved in childcare. And then that gets into the whole issue of paying. How much can you pay somebody? Which continues to be kind of the issue for for the companies in the area that are trying to have kids, and they have a hard time paying an amount that the people will work for and stay and provide the child care. And we've seen on some of the local companies, businesses who have raised their wages 18 for a teaching position, a 15 to 16 for an aide type position. Seems to be a number that works to get people into those open jobs. So we're continuing to work on trying to figure out how to get those wages raised. The Dane Hansen Foundation, they've seen that exact same problem and are working on it in their counties. Of course, we're one of those counties, but right now they're trying to figure out the more rural parts of their area. There are 26 counties. They're trying to get those done. But we are looking at a meeting. I've talked to Holly about Mike's calendar. I've talked with the county folks about Philip's calendar, and trying to put together a meeting here where we get all those parties, because there's a lot of different things going on. Maybe if everybody knows what is we're working together, it might be to our advantage. There are a lot of state programs being talked about right now, additional funds coming out of Topeka. Whether or not those actually happen this legislative session, I don't know, but it is a good year. The state's got a lot of money right now.
Kind of piggyback on that. When the number of jobs have been listed with other projects, we tend to get an average salary, hourly average rate, which sometimes is different from, I'm not sure, and Mike may have to help me here, whether I want to do mean, modal, or median.
Median, I get all those, yeah.
But as a former math major, I'm embarrassed. I can't remember which one to use right now. But if you have one guy making $1 billion, but you got 100 making $3 an hour, your average looks pretty good. And can we get those broken down? Because where most of those jobs are weighted is really going to determine if those employees are going to be using social services, or whether their taxes are going to go to contribute to social services, or if they can afford child care or can't afford child care.
So is it mean, median, or mode?
I know modal would tell me where the bulk of them are. But
Right. Median would be what's right in the middle. I mean, the way I always remembered it from my stat class is the median's in the middle of the road. So in your example, if you've got someone at an exceptionally low wage rate and you've got an executive, they're not going to offset each other. It's going to find the wage rate that's right in the middle of the pack. And that's a good point in terms of executive wages or high wages for a few select positions can certainly skew it. So as it relates to this, there's probably multiple ways to address that. You could require that they all meet that wage rate, the target wage rate. You could discount or disregard those that don't and just count towards the number, those that meet the target wage rate. But that is a level of detail that's helpful. The next step, based on your guidance, is we will then draft a resolution that kind of puts some additional specifics to this. So if you have a feeling about that approach, now would be the time to tell us.
Yeah, because if that wage is too low, then and I'm going to use the term loosely, government and society end up subsidizing that job.
Sure.
So it's costing us money to create that job. It probably costs us more if they're not working at all, but
There's
still,
certainly
yeah.
value in gathering the mean, median, and mode information. That gives you a better sense of the wage rates. But from a policy standpoint, that isn't an ironclad direction. It's just kind of an overview of the information that you have. If the goal is to not reward wages below a target rate, then I think the easiest approach may be to just count those jobs that meet or exceed that identified target wage rate.
Does the KDOL have any rough correlation with the living wage? And they're probably calculated slightly differently. And I know I don't know the answer. I'm just asking out of ignorance.
That's something we can definitely research, definitely do that.
You know, the other point that came up is ramping up, and there are quite a few projects that'll have a phased approach. And as you may know from some of our other IRB agreements, we've done pro rata calculations, those type of things. So, you know, if the goal was, if the goal was 5 jobs for 10 years, that's the equivalent of 50 jobs. You could look at it in that way and then look at the phasing schedule to see how it compares to those 50. I think you need to be mindful that you don't put all the jobs off in the outer phases. It gets hard to confirm and make sure that they deliver on that. But it is not at all uncommon that they'll increase their jobs over time.
Well, and I think as Mr. May said, this is kind of a worksheet, so, you know, and I think on other projects, we've seen so many, you know, jobs at this, you know, this wage and that wage, and if we see it leaning one way or the other, I think whether it's this commission or any commission, they have the ability to take that into consideration, because this isn't a hard and fast rule that they get this much, you know, because they come in and say their average rate, you know, wage is 2120. So we can, I think commissions can take that into consideration. And I guess we don't have a policy when we've talked about it before, and I don't know if we've done it much before, but, you know, clawbacks, you know, when somebody promises 25 jobs or 50 jobs and they don't meet that, how we address that. Was there any discussion at that?
It's been something that, I guess, the last 3 IRBs, you've done that?
Yeah,
So-
the approach that we've taken is that that proportional approach. If somewhere along the line they fail to meet the agreed upon numbers, then their abatement scales back proportionally. Now, it could be an all or nothing, that if you fail to meet it, you lose the exemption altogether. I can tell you from past experience in other communities, when you have an employer that's invested and they're, you know, productive in the community but falling short of a target number, to completely cut them off gets to be a practical difficulty, where a proportional reduction it might be a little bit easier to implement.
Yeah, I couldn't remember how we'd handle that. And then again, you know, when you have some of these that go out 10 years, you know, who's tracking that if we have a clawback also, you know, because you're good chance you don't have the same commission, you know, who knows who's.
There is a tracking process at the staff level, and that's the other thing that we've been able to incorporate recently into the development agreements. Is a lot of these applicants are participating in state programs as well, so we've tried to synchronize our job reporting and counting to the state process, so that they're submitting to us the same forms they're submitting to the state.
Yeah, who and where is that list kept, so we have a standard place that somebody can look that up if, you know, at some
Development
point.
Services does that annually. They submit to Development Services, and then we tally that up.
And I know we're getting ready to go into some strategic planning, but I think that would be a good thing for every commission to see in the future. If we've got tax abatements out there and there's certain jobs tied to it, I think it'd be an important thing that could be reported to the commission every year, kind of like we do our budgeting and stuff. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah,
So we don't have any surprises, and we can, you know.
And I think staff, our staff at that level can kind of vet that, but my suggestion would be that might be a good summary report coming from the EDO, but we
Yeah.
can.
And
certainly-
that would be something, now that we're discussing that, I'd like to see it, strategic planning, when we get that, just an update on what IRBs we have out there and how we have those tied into what else.
Okay.
Commissioner Longbine, any more
No.
comments?
No.
Mr. Linkowitz?
No questions, but I'm definitely anxious and curious to see what develops pertaining to the child care issue.
You asked me when I got into this 30 years ago, would you ever have to worry about housing or childcare? Oh, wow, that's not economic development. Well, obviously, it is economic development in a very important way, so.
Is there anybody in close proximity that appears to have that dialed in or getting closer to a solution than we currently are?
Maybe.
Johnson County, perhaps?
Yeah. I mean, there's some small counties who have gotten some grants to help fund some startups of some new at-home childcare facilities. But, I mean, we're short, we believe, about 800 positions, 800 kid slots. So that's a huge number to work on. So there's some discussions going on locally. The YMCA has been doing a great job of meeting some of the needs, but they are like everybody else that's trying to find that worker and then pay them a living wage or close to a living wage.
When you ask about communities, the two that come to mind for me are Lindsborg. They've kind of made it known that they developed a facility. It was a public-private partnership. They had an investor that helped, I think, fund the construction, and they've been able to stand up a child care facility. In terms of, I think it filled the need for child care slots. In terms of cost reduction, I think they're passing through costs, and they've got some cost reduction from the building. And then Garden City, quite some time ago, kind of offered up an approach and a plan, and it seemed pretty comprehensive, but I'm not sure that it's been implemented. I think a couple of our commissioners
believe
and others went to
Mayor,
Garden City.
Commissioner Davis and I attended that, and it was very informative. If anything else, it told you that child care is highly regulated. From what I understood, they had what sounded like a good program, but for some reason, I'll be curious to find out why. I don't think it's been implemented either. So,
Right.
but yeah, if
And
you
that
could
was
find somebody that knows how to do
pre-COVID,
it, so we don't have to invent the wheel, we can just,
Steal it.
And the other thing that, when you look at it, that it seemed to me, since we're talking about childcare, is this sustainability. Just throwing money at it once doesn't really solve your long-term problems. So that's kind of where some of that comes in. So,
Much like the homelessness forum, child care is a topic that it looks like an opportunity for a community conversation. It's certainly broader than just the city, and there's a lot of players involved, but I think a panel discussion of that might be of interest, at least, and community-wide topic.
Necessity sometimes creates these solutions. If at the higher end of the so-called, white collar, businesses, if they're competing for the top employees or graduates from school, child care is a very attractive carrot to dangle in front of someone. And if we're approaching that point, child care becomes a very practical method of getting new employees. So we may have more help on the employer end than what we realize.
There are some people very interested. It's just a matter of tell them what to do. How do we structure something where they get some benefit other than just a general feel good for the community type thing. They've got people to report to, and they want to know where those numbers are being invested. So that's an issue we've got to work through.
Do you have any update on how that Salina Tech program is going?
I was out there 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I think it's slowly gaining ground. There's some discussions about maybe them building a building where they could do some hands-on training with those students and provide child care. That's one of the things that's being a maybe, a what if. So I think those kids, I say kids, adults, that are, and then there are also high school kids that are also in the training program. I think it's gaining some speed, but it's still a long way from where we need them to be.
Any other questions or comments about the abatement guide that we've been presented?
I'd like to put, kind of more formalize the description of the jobs. I think city manager's idea of, looking at those jobs above whatever metric, and I'd be open to suggestions which one's more
Yeah.
practical to use. Because we ought to be incentivizing jobs that we don't have to double back and pay for again.
So is that a suggestion? They go back and,
Yeah, and I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it has to be given a percentage here, but I think we need a
More in the
worksheet. A
definition,
worksheet needs to
right.
go along with the jobs that are attached. Makes sense to
yeah.
me.
I think we've had bigger problems with the guidelines, and the percentages kind of seem to be a day of sale discussion. But just having the guidelines
Okay, we
in
can
which
dig
to
into that.
judge the projects.
Glad to.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, the other step will be that we'll need to prepare a resolution that kind of formalizes all that. So there'll be a little bit more detail that we'll, this will be the framework, and then based on your feedback, we can work together to prepare that resolution.
It's a step in the right direction compared to how we were doing it before, so.
Could we look at adding a projection of the total jobs over that 10-year period? Is that?
I think that's reasonable to ask, whether or not the companies will be willing to make that commitment. That'll be something we'll just have to ask them.
And one of
Most of the time, the projections companies have, obviously they know 5 years out. 10 might be a little tough, but that's a possibility.
How do you determine the but-for qualification? This would not expand without this abatement. Obviously, I don't fault a business for coming to ask for it. I mean, you don't want to leave money on the table, but on the other hand, I've always wondered if that's a pointless thing to put in there, or is there a way to snoop around and find out?
Yeah, it is a difficult one. I'll be totally honest about that. Sometimes you feel like maybe you're getting played, but oftentimes I think the companies we've had here, I've never felt like that was the case for any of these projects. If it's maybe a startup, I've had a lot of history with startups before, and those are a lot more riskier. I'll just put it that way.
Some projects are able to demonstrate a financial gap that they're trying to fill, and then how this fills it. Conversely, it's awful hard to meet a but-for when they've already proceeded with their project and they're approaching us after the fact.
Well, that was one I was thinking of in particular, but right, unless all the numbers, all the books are laid open in front of you. I don't know how much of that you require ahead of time, but I'm just always curious that's a very hard one to satisfy.
I agree.
Okay, anything else from the commission? Any
Got more work to do.
Any comments or anything from the public? Any board members? Okay, if not, we will adjourn and be back here at 4 o'clock for the regular scheduled meeting. Okay, I've been signaled that it's 4 o'clock, so I'll call the February 6, 2022 Salina City Commission meeting to order. I would ask staff for confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, can we have roll call?
Mayor Hoppick,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Linkowitz,
Here.
Commissioner Longbine,
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Hey, with that, those that are able, would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we have no awards and proclamations today. Also, no public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time. That will then bring us to the consent agenda.
Item 5.1, approve the minutes of January 23rd, 2023. Item 5.2, authorize the city manager to execute an amended and restated public-private partnership agreement for the Smoky Hill River Greenway Trail from the YMCA to Ohio Street.
Okay, I would ask, is there any commissioner that would like to remove an item for consent agenda? If not, I would accept a motion
Mayor,
to...
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda items 5.1 and 5.2. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that leads us to administration.
Item 6.1, approve ordinance number 22-11122 on second reading, changing the zoning district classification from A1 to R1 and R1 and R2 on a 46.84 acre unplatted tract of land located on the west side of Holmes Road, north of Magnolia Road.
Thank you. And due to a conflict of interest on both items 6.1 and 6.2, I will recuse myself and I will turn the meeting over to Vice Mayor Longbine.
Background, ordinance number 22-1122 was passed on first reading on June 27th with a second reading held in abeyance until the property was final platted. Since that time, Magnolia Hills has completed the final platting of this property. Has there been any changes or comments since?
There have not.
There have not. Any comment, discussion from commissioners?
Nope.
Any public comment? Hear a motion to,
Mayor, I move we approve on second reading ordinance number 22-11122.
Second.
Nope. Okay.
roll call, please.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Linkowitz,
Aye.
Commissioner Vice Mayor Longbine,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hoppick.
Motion passes. That brings us to item 6.2.
Item 6.2, approve ordinance number 22-11120 on second reading, changing the zoning district classification from A1 to R2 on a 52-acre unplatted tract of land located east and south of the Stone Lake Sandpit Lake at the northeast corner of South Ohio Street and Schilling Road.
And once again, this was passed on first reading June 27th, 22, with second reading held in abeyance until the property was final platted. Stone Lake, since that time, Stone Lake has completed the final platting. Has there been any changes or comments since?
There's not.
Okay, any discussion from the commission?
No.
Any public comment?
Mayor, I move we approve on second reading ordinance number 22-11120.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Linkowitz,
Aye.
Commissioner Vice Mayor Longbine,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hoppick.
And ordinance number 22-1120 passed 4-0. We'll welcome back Mayor Hoppick.
Thank you. That will lead us to item 6.3.
Item 6.3, Banking Services. 6.3A, approve resolution number 23-8106, designating official depositories for city funds, providing authority to wire transfers, providing for authorization of check signers, and authorizing securities purchases and sales. Item 6.3B, authorize the city manager to execute an agreement with Equity Bank to provide banking services for the city of Salina.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Debbie Pack, Director of Finance Administration. This is kind of a two-part item today. The first part is a resolution that designates by official action, which is required under statute, for depositories of any banking institutions that would hold any of the city's funds, whether that be operating or investment funds. The last time the city had adopted a designation resolution was on November 25th, 2019, under Resolution 197773. In May of 2021, Equity Bank merged with American State Bank, which was on our list previously. And in order to update the designation of depositories for the city, staff is recommending the adoption of Resolution 238107, which replaces American State Bank with Equity Bank as an official depository for the city. The second item, and probably the more complicated item, is the Banking Services RFP. In October of 2022, staff went out with an RFP proposal for banking services, which included what was not limited to operating accounts, any subsidiary accounts, online banking, lockbox services, and purchasing cards. This RFP was sent to all local financial institutions, was posted on the city's website, and notice was published in the Salina Journal. The city received 4 responses to that RFP from Bennington Bank, Equity, Sunflower, and UMB. An evaluation team consisting of the city manager, the deputy city manager, assistant city manager, director of finance, deputy director of finance, and director of continuous and process improvement evaluated the proposals based on both qualifications and financial structure. The team found that all of the proposals met the specifications, and all of the respondents were highly qualified institutions that could meet the needs of the city. The RFP also itemized banking services that the city was requesting and asked banks to provide their ability to perform those, and also to provide us with the fees associated with these services. In order to achieve a waiver of fees, some banks provided or proposed minimum balances to be held with either non-bearing interest accounts or with a 1% credit to offset those fees. The other part of the RFP was the proposal of a rate for return on the investment of city's deposits. So there's 2 sides. We have fees and expenses, and we also have what we're going to earn on the money that we have sitting in each institution. All 4 respondents used an index, either the Kansas Municipal Investment Pool rate or the federal funds rate, and all 4 discounted those indexes at some level. For example, they might say an index minus 20 basis points or something like that. Staff consulted our financial advisors to make sure that the indexes were comparable, and found that in most cases, as either of those indexes that were used, as one moves, the other one will fluctuate similarly. In order for us to make an objective comparison of the proposals, staff developed a standard scenario. That scenario included the assumption that the city would hold $25 million in cash at the institution, and it also provided the banks with an average number of transactions that we would have each month. And so we took that information and we analyzed it based on the fees per those transaction types, and then the calculation of the interest that we would earn, and we netted that out to try to determine what was the best financial decision for the city. After that review, the team is recommending that the city of Salina enter in a 3-year banking agreement with Equity Bank, and we didn't put this in there, but utilizing the second of their 2 options, which is the variable rate. I provided the analysis on that we used for the proposals. Basically, as I explained, we took the average number of transactions, determined what those fees would be. We took the $25 million average monthly balance that we were using as a basis, and we determined the earnings based on that balance, and then the cost to those transactions. And I provided that for you. If you have any questions on that, I'd be glad to answer that. The impact of the costs for this is the banking fees, of course, and the actual and the estimated earnings for the interest on the investments. The actual performance in these will vary. There's no way we can know exactly how many transactions we have or what those rates are going to do. I will note in the analysis, you'll notice that there was a line for 3 of those banks that gave us a floor rate, which means that at no time would our rate go below that rate, which is important if the rates fall again like they have in the past. Today's rates are high, so that we're not that concerned, but if rates would fall, we do have that kind of floor that those 3 banks had proposed that they would maintain. So today we have 2 action items for City Commission. One is Resolution 238016 to approve designating official depositories for the city funds. The second option is you could approve that with amendments as you deem appropriate, postpone consideration of the resolution, and give staff information that you need to have to make that decision at a future date, or vote to deny that resolution, which would eliminate us from being able to contract with Equity Bank for banking services. Staff recommends option number 1 on that action. The second action item is authorization for the city manager to execute a banking services agreement with Equity Bank. You could do that with amendments as you deem appropriate, postpone consideration, or vote to deny, which would cause us to either have to go back with another banking RFP or stay with our current banking services. Staff recommends option number 1 in that case as well. I will note there are a lot of agreements that we'll enter into, not just a banking services agreement. There's a lot of other agreements that the city manager will have to sign on our behalf as we get into the banking. So if you have any questions, feel free to answer those. We do have representatives from Equity Bank here if you have any questions for them or their proposal, regarding their proposal, and we'd be glad to answer those.
Was this a 3-year agreement?
It's a 3-year agreement,
Okay,
yes.
that's what I thought. Okay, I'll start.
No question.
Clarification. Should, in this motion, should we specify that's option number 2?
You very well could, yes. Otherwise, you're going to give the city manager authority to sign on our behalf, and he's going to pick that option.
Certainly the intent, but clarifying in the
Promises.
motion.
Yeah,
Go ahead and put it in the motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's good. Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned the floor rate. I'm curious just what it is.
The floor rate?
Yes.
For 2 of the for 2 of the proposals, it was 0.25%, and for one of the other ones was 0.2%.
Thank you.
And that rate range, 4% is the top?
That was the current rate at the time. The federal fund range fluctuates, so they typically have a low and a high, and as I mentioned in the report, at that time, it's 3.754%.
Okay.
So that was the range for that particular index.
That's going to follow that prime rate.
Yeah,
Yes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, it'll be the average funds on deposit for the month.
Yes.
And then.
And that rate's determined at the beginning of the month before. So for March, and Larry can confirm this if I'm saying this wrong, for our March interest, that rate would be determined on whatever that range is on February 28th. So then that would be the rate that we would have for that next month. So it's determined monthly, and then our balance is based on our average daily balance in our account.
Pretty small.
So our comparison was same date and time for all proposals, all in proposed indexes, and then the assumptions that Debbie described, so that we could make as much of an apples-to-apples comparison as we could, knowing that actual performance will vary going forward.
Yeah, look very thorough, so thank you. Okay, any comments or questions from the public? Okay, if not, I will bring it back to the commission for,
I think we're going to comment.
oh, Larry wants, okay, sorry. You have to be a little faster.
We're the same age, remember? Larry Brittingham, Regional President of Equity Bank. Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, I just want all of you to know how excited we are to be able to provide services for the city of Salina. I would say I've been through hundreds of RFPs in my career, and the one that Debbie and her staff put together was as fair as any that I've ever seen. And I think all the banks had to feel awful good about the opportunity to win the bid. And we have a lot of experience in public funds. I personally have a lot of experience in municipalities throughout my career, and so does our staff. Equity banks, we have 71 locations. We're about a $5 billion bank, very strong bank, and we were just named the top bank in Kansas by Newsweek magazine. So we're excited to be a partner with the city of Salina and working with them, and just want to again express our appreciation for the process, a very fair process, and to the commission and the city manager, Mike Schrag, for their support of moving it to Equity Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I did have one question, whether it's City Manager Scragg or Ms. Pack. The analysis, was that sent out to every bank so they could see how we analyze this? So they were aware if they had any questions or comments, they could get back with you?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
What I did was, first of all, I sent out the analysis by individual bank so that they could confirm and verify the information that I was going to put in the summary analysis. And then I did provide them with the overall analysis of all 4 banks after that information was gathered
Good.
back.
I think that's good. Thank you for doing that. Okay, now I believe we're ready to bring it back to the commission. And we will do item 6.3A first.
Mayor Hoppick, I move to approve resolution number 238106, designating official depositories for city funds, providing authority for wire transfers, providing for authorization of check signers, and authorizing securities purchases and sales, and repealing resolution number 19-7773.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to approve resolution number 23-8106, designating official depositories for the city of Salina funds and repealing resolution 19-7773. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. That will move us to 6.3B.
Mayor, I authorize the city manager to execute a banking services agreement with Equity Bank for option number 2.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve an agreement with Equity Bank to provide banking service for the city of Salina under option 2. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That also passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Brittingham, for being here. And thank you for all your work, Deb. Appreciate your thoroughness on your RFP. So that will bring us to item 6.4.
Item 6.4, approve resolution number 23-8103, adopting the 2023 to 2027 capital improvement program.
Ms. Pack.
Thank you again. The city's capital improvement program has two distinct categories. The first is actual capital items, which we set a 5-year capital improvement program. Those are typically larger, typically debt financed and possibly cash financed projects. The second is what we call a sub-CIP, which is always cash funded, and there's smaller projects within a bigger allocation of those funds. The proposed CIP was presented to City Commission during study sessions for the 2023 budget on June 28th and July 6th of 2022. The CIP also has to go under a review by the Planning Commission, which happened on January 31st, 2023, and they passed a resolution to accept that CIP. There are a couple of changes to the CIP since it was presented back last summer. The first one occurred in September 19, 2022, when the City Commission approved adding the sanitation truck building project to the CIP. And the second one was something that staff identified after that the summer budget sessions, which is the landfill cell 21 design and construction. That's a project that's done about every 7 years. So we've added landfill cell design of $100,000 to the 2023 CIP, and then construction to follow in 2024. And that project would be debt financed and supported by solid waste fees. The sub-CIP allocations were determined back in the budget process for 2023. And basically what I've provided you is a list of detailed items now that the staff has determined to use those fundings for. I will remind you that back in October, there's an additional step here, because back in October of 2021, City Commission approved for us to set up some reserve capital funds so that we can allocate, that we can capture any funding that hadn't been spent. So if we allocate $500,000 for spending on parks maintenance, if we didn't spend that funds prior to this time, that money just went back in the fund and it never got to be used for the purpose that we intended it for. So back in 2021, we created reserve funds, and now what we're doing is we're taking that allocation and we're actually transferring it to that fund so that in the future, if they don't spend it in the current year, they always have that funding available for them to be used for that purpose, and they're not losing that funds. Since that happened in mid-year 2021, we made some transfers in the 2022 budget, but we are doing a little bit of catch-up in the 2023 budget for those, and I've noted those for parks maintenance, about $390,000, buildings and facilities, about $128,000, and vehicles and equipment, about $71,000. Each item, just to note, I won't go through the details unless you have questions. I can certainly answer them, and most of the department heads, or some of them are here that can answer them too. I will remind you that any purchase over $30,000 that exceeds the city manager's spending authority will come back to City Commission for approval, as well as anything that is debt financed will come back to the City Commission for approval prior to expenditures or commitments on those particular projects. So we've identified the following action items for you to approve Resolution 23-8103, adopting the 2023 to 2027 Capital Improvement Program. You can approve that with amendments as you deem appropriate. Postpone consideration of the resolution to a specific time and give us direction on additional information you might need. Or not approve that, giving staff further direction how you want to handle the CIP and sub-CIP project spending. So I would stand for any questions if you have any on this item.
If I could offer one clarification. In the scenario that Debbie gave with $500,000 for parks not being spent, I don't know that it's accurate to say it never got put back to that project. We would run an accounting on the side. The department head certainly would too, and kind of keep track of, I had these funds and I didn't get them spent in the year. By setting the reserve balances up, we've formalized kind of that accounting and segregation of those funds that we were trying to maintain a running tally of somewhat on the side.
Correct. And it also allows the departments that are in charge of those different categories of sub-CIP, that if they have a larger project that would exceed their normal annual allocation, that they could set aside some of those funds for a future project that might be higher than what they're annually going to get, and then we wouldn't have to worry about the budget process on those. So,
Very good.
any questions?
Commissioner Linkwitz?
Questions?
When we engage in our strategic planning, we'll have an opportunity to talk about what's in this CIP, and if you're wanted to be changes or amendments or additions, that'd be part of the strategic planning.
This action will approve what we have on the CIP list for 2023. And I think what we'll see in the strategic planning, especially for the sub-CIP allocations that come out of sales tax, is a discussion about Are those at an appropriate level? Do we want to change those allocations to those particular, categories of spending, if that makes sense? So your approval today will approve that any of those items on the 2023 we're going to go forward with. You're basically giving them that authorization.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, the department heads will use this as the starting point to initiate those projects. The strategic planning conversation could add additional projects if we can get them in the 2023 schedule. So it'll be much easier to add than contract, just because of the timing of it.
Right.
Okay, any questions or comments from the public? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor Humphrey, I move approval of resolution number 23-8103, adopting the 2023 to 2027 capital improvement program.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 23-8103, adopting the 2023 through 2027 capital improvement program. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you. That'll lead us to item 6.5.
Item 6.5, Superior Contracting and Manufacturing Services Company, Industrial Revenue Bond Request.
Good evening again, Commissioners, Mayor. Today I've got several folks here with me. I want to introduce, first off, over here on my right is Chris Harpoth, I think I've butchered his name already. He is CEO of Superior Contracting and Manufacturing Services Company. If you may recall, they were here a couple of years ago, and since then they've changed their name to better reflect on what they're doing for our area industry. Also with him is Mark Millard, their CFO, Tylen Dyer, who's with the Pitcher Group out of Wichita. We'll hear from him in a little bit. And then right behind me is Stephanie Carlin. Stephanie is with C5, who is advisors to Superior. So this has been our team of folks working on this exciting warehousing project. If you can get exciting about warehousing, but it is something that we do believe it's needed here in the community. We're fortunate that most of the available square footage in the community is leased up or has been sold recently. And so we're at a point we need to have some additional footage put in place for our existing companies to have space for either raw materials or finished goods, whichever it may be. And their intent is to work with area companies, and we have actually already been meeting with some companies who have warehousing needs. And so we're at a point now we need to start moving forward on the but-for, as we were talking about earlier. So this is definitely not a done deal by any means. When Mike and I talked about this last week, I believe it was, we said this will be more of a hearing, not the official public hearing, but more of an opportunity for you all to learn about the project. We will be coming back to you on the 27th of February for the official public hearing, if you all are willing to move forward with the project being the critical issue. As you have seen, you should have gotten our new spreadsheet, which is, of course, not formally adopted, but we did want to go ahead and work through this. This is about a $21 million project. The job numbers are on the low end, but we also believe that the growth will be there this is more of an initial start for the jobs. As that facility, it's going to be 250,000 square feet. It's located on 13 acres of their existing property. That's on the south end of the property up along Vortex Avenue. That's where the building is going to be, and you'll see some drawings here. I'm not going to discuss that. I'm going to let Tylen talk about that. But they're looking at initially 3 people for their company that would help initially do the warehousing services. Now, as this grows, as more companies are located in, we're going to see that number increase. We don't know exactly how many. It could be an option of, it could be their people providing it as a service to their tenants, or it could be the tenants themselves, where it be XYZ company, they could bring their own people in to manage the warehouse services, load the trucks, unload the trucks, whatever needs to be done. So there's a couple options. So we're working through that, and Tylen will be able to address that a little bit when we have him up here. But our board of directors met on the 26th, and we approved the recommendation of 100% abatement for a 10-year period. You'll have the sheets, and hopefully you recognize this is a nice new format from Wichita State. It's a little bit easier to read, I believe. Still a little tough to get through all the numbers, but the main thing is we want to turn to the second page at the bottom. And this is where the benefit cost ratio information is. That's what we always talk about. They're looking at a 1.9 number, which is above the 1, which is kind of our bottom line, if we're able to do that. But we feel like this is a reasonable project, good project. The company is quite committed to the community, and when we were going through the process of scoring the project, we looked at what they're doing in the community, and they are providing services to all our major manufacturers here in the community, and everything I hear from our local folks, they have very high regard for the work that Superior does within the community. So I'm going to call Tylen up and let him talk about what they do, how they're involved in the project, and then we'll look at the pictures, and you'll be able to see what the building is going to look like.
Thank you, Mitch. Mayor, Commission, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to
Go
be
ahead
here.
and state your name and who you're with again, if you would,
Perfect.
please. just
Yeah,
for
I'm
the
Tylen
public.
Dyer with Petra. So we are, just a quick synopsis, I won't bore you, but we're a real estate helping firm is what we are. Not to be confused with developers, not to be confused with investors. We're all of it stuck together. So our passion is about helping people, which is why we're paired with this incredible company here. So I can go deeper if you'd like, but I'll just leave it at that level if that's okay. Okay, perfect. Do you mind pulling up the slides real quick for me, please? So Mitch did a great job of talking about the overall project. As you can see, you've seen 1,000 of these. If you drive up and down 35, you've been to Dallas, Kansas City. The point of this is not to be fancy at all, right? Light industrial. You do not make any additional money for the investors if it's fancy. So that's the last thing you want to do. You want to make it utilitarian, and you want to make it nice enough for anybody that you're going to bring to this facility. So this facility is planned around logistics and interstate commerce, right? So as Mitch mentioned, we're not trying to drive a whole lot of jobs in this situation. This is about retainage of companies in the city and not for additional job growth. The job growth will happen at other facilities whenever they're able to outsource to locations like this. It's usually how it happens on that. Warehousing and distribution is exactly where this falls. So when he mentioned the job side, we have anywhere from 3 to 5 people per tenant in this building is kind of how it's expected. Everybody handles their stuff differently, depending on how they do it. So the job numbers are completely dependent on who's where and how they fill this facility. So just to keep it at the highest level, I'll go as deep as anyone would like, of course, but this is it's about 240,000 square feet, but they're 50-foot bays. If you can just get your head around, there's a bunch of 50-foot squares in the building. I believe, if you go to the next slide, please. So you can see this. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see where all the tic-tac-toes are, essentially. Each one of those is for all intents and purposes, it's a pipe, 6 to 8 inch column or pipe that sticks up in the air and holds your structure in place. So this is a concrete tilt-up building. The cost differential between concrete tilt-up and metal buildings right now is negligible. So from where we see it, this is a much better building. You get more out of it. It lasts longer, in our opinion. I won't make a big statement on that because some people would argue with me, but this is how we see it. The overall design of this building is based on Amazon. So you guys will hear that name a lot in this world, but if you build a building this size and you don't have Amazon in mind, you're not using the right approach, in our opinion. We are talking to quite a few tenants here. We've been very pleased with the number of needs that already exist in town. So we're not too concerned about filling it up. Frankly, we are under those conversations right now, as Mitch said. We're looking at a 32-foot eave height. If you look at this, the picture on the northwest corner there, depending on how the logistics work, but a lot of different folks would load in the back and then come out the front side. So it's easy access to 135, which is phenomenal. It's easy access to the airport, and it's really close to everybody else in that airport authority area. So from the need, it's the lot is already zoned. It's drained, as you can see, the area to the east. There's a low area right there that handles all the drainage. So there's not a large expense there, and it has a rough drainage already taken care of on the site. So it's been used as a laydown yard for a very long time, which limits the amount of dirt we have to move for this project, which keeps the numbers reasonable. A couple other items to show in this. Right now, we're showing about 344 parking stalls on the front. As you guys know, that's not necessary when there's only going to be 8 to 10 employees. So that's part of the process. We would do standard zoning and code regulations to come to those terms. So that's what's shown today on the front end. We could expand the building as necessary. Right now, you're looking at about 5 bays from north to south and about 18 from west to east. Give a little here and there, depending on the size. Let's see. So the overall package, as you can see at the top right-hand corner, we put built to suit, which is the plan. Right now, we're not in a market that's super strong. Like I said earlier, if you go to Dallas, Kansas City, different places like that, you'll see a lot of these spec built. And one of those build it, if you build it, they'll come situations. Salina's right on the cusp of this. I think if we put 1 or 2 of these up, we'll see a different feel in the market. But right now, the folks we're talking to are driven mostly by lease rates. So just like we could talk about multifamily, we could talk about 100 different things and this is not as an insult, please understand, but when I say rural Kansas, anything outside of Wichita and Kansas City is considered rural Kansas. The rates have not been ran up as they should. You heard Mitch say most everything's taken at this time, and it's true in most areas in the city, and it's full of great people, and that's awesome, but they keep their rates low. And so that can be restrictive when you talked about the financing side. So with those rates that are going up, there'd be a pretty substantial jump to move people into here from where they're at today. And so our lease rate is somewhere in that $6 to $7 a square foot. The reason why there's a range on that, and that's triple net, in case somebody's wondering, as opposed to gross. Triple net is so important here, which is why we're here. That'll help that item as well. But when we build this out, we are looking right now at build to suit because we need to remove some of the trucks off the back. If you can see that, there's a whole bunch of trucks that are on the backside. Those are all dock high doors. Every one of those is a big expense to the project. And so if we can get a couple folks who aren't only doing transportation out of there and they're constantly shipping everything like Amazon does, that limits the cost and also allows us to stay more in the lease rate that we can do to fill it up. So, anything I missed?
My comment that you use Amazon as kind of an example, but that is not one of the targets.
Yes,
initially,
thank you. So when I say we've used Amazon, if you look, the main split is dead center of the building, right in the middle. And so the reason why I mentioned Amazon is first thing Amazon does is they go into these buildings, they rip out the front door right in the middle and the back door, and they drive all the cars through there, the little vans, cars, everybody who delivers all your packages, they come right from a facility like this. So we set it up like that just in case it transitions or the need is there. The Amazon indeed is not one of the folks we are talking to on this. We have talked to 4 different local companies that are all really hungry for this. They're trying to figure out timing, existing leases, all that fun stuff. So as you can imagine, unlike an individual who's looking for an apartment or something like that, this is a lot more moving pieces. In fact, last week, the end of last week, we had a great conversation with a national house that represents one of the local companies here in town that has a really large presence in the U.S. and the world, and they're very direct on their negotiating. I think he was in Connecticut, somewhere where he was, and so just a different kind of deal. He was wide open. He loved Salina, and he loved everything about it, and they're trying to figure out why it's worth it to them and all of that. So we've had great conversations. Everyone. No leases have been signed to date. We're trying to get all this figured out so we can keep this as a decent lease rate at triple net, as opposed to going gross and then running that lease rate up. Anything else I missed?
Would you explain triple net in case anyone has a question about that?
Sure, most definitely. So a gross lease is real simple. You pay one amount, and that's all you live on, right? That's your only expense. A triple net means you're going to absorb everything from the property tax to the maintenance to any other special items in there. There's a very technical background to that, and I can look it up and send it to everybody if they need it. But the main point is that the property tax, the insurance, the maintenance, all of this stuff is part of the lease. That is standard for these larger buildings. They expect it to be triple net. They do not expect it to be a gross lease, especially on a new build. And it's not really that impactful on the new build with the maintenance side, as you can imagine, but the property taxes is a really, really large piece of this, which is why we're here. So great question. Thank you.
Okay, is there, Mitch?
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So we talked about, when I first got up, that we'd be coming back on the 27th. So if you all have questions between now and then, please talk to the city manager or call me, myself, and we'll get those answered for you. And look forward to talking more detail at the end of the month.
Okay, questions from, I'll start on my left. Either one?
Three, and if you need to get back to me, that's fine. I noticed in here there's a plan to have this operational by the end of this year,
That's what we're shooting for, right?
which, begs in the back of my mind, okay, so the but-for argument looks a little weak when I hear that already, that it's going to be up and running.
You got to shoot for something.
Well, true, but it's the appearance. All right. Would this building be expected to empty out a lot of warehouse space? Or are we going to end up with a glut of unused warehouse space?
We don't. I don't see that at all. I mean, we're in a shortage situation right now, so
Okay.
no, I don't see that being an issue.
And do the lease rates jump up when the abatement ends in 10 years?
Well, that'd be a question for them to ask. I don't know.
No, I can touch on that. The lease rates did
You
not change.
come please to the microphone. Thank you.
So I'll address two quick questions. So the timing on this, the design is simple. So the design is essentially finished. Like I said, it's an Amazon design. We've done it 100 times with the group. So the design period is very, very easy. The entitlements are already in place at this site. It's already zoned, all that stuff. If there was a change, we'd be asking for a parking variation, would be about the extent of that. So that's the speed of it. This is a 9 to 10 month build. So when we started talking about this in December, January, December, it was 23 wasn't out of whack. We also have a couple tenants who need to take possession first quarter of next year. So that's why that is. The but-for is the answer of nothing started, right? So if nothing moves forward, then we can stop. It's not like we already broke ground on it. That's the first one. Second deal, the lease rates will not go up based on the abatements, if you follow me. That just is a pass-through to the tenant, and the tenants will have to absorb that cost. So the way they see it is the lease rates went up, they're spending more on it, but the overall lease rate for the first couple of years, we'll sign long-term leases with these folks that'll have cost of living indices bumps on them. And so they'll be in 2 to 4 year terms, depending on how great of negotiators they are, and that kind of flow through. Does that answer that question?
All right, when that property tax does become payable, I'm assuming that has to be absorbed as well.
It'll be absorbed by the tenants. Yes, sir.
So the actual rate may go up, but those other expenses go up.
Most definitely.
Okay. And just philosophically, just help me get around this as not being a job producer, or a manufacturing facility per se,
Yeah.
and how it fits into the overall
Yeah.
economic.
Sure. I think that's a great question. You think about who the tenant is going to be. It will be, we can think of on one hand, I'm not going to name them, but we can all name them, and what their needs are in terms of space for raw materials, for finished goods. So that's their needs are. Could be one or the other, it could be both. They may need them on both ends of their product. So, I mean, this is truly a manufacturing type project. It's going to help those companies who have needs, maybe for space in their own buildings. They need to get maybe that warehoused items out of their building, or they could be in another building whose owners are wanting to see a change in that use, and they're wanting those companies to find other places to warehouse their products.
This is preferable to expanding their own footprint.
Well, a lot of times,
Sorry, Chief.
a lot of times there's
I guess you
there's no
couldn't hear me.
space.
This microphone was off. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of times that those companies don't have space, and it's easier for them to go out and let somebody else make that investment for the warehousing, because it can go up and down depending on their needs. Some companies have a seasonal aspect to their business, and they need more space during those high times of having excess capacity, or they're building up capacity for their busy season. So it's definitely a industrial use, and I don't have any doubt that this is something. You go to Kansas City, you see these buildings along the interstate, anywhere. Wichita as well, you see them. Those are the ones going down. You see those are metal buildings. There's, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them right there before you get into the city. So this is something that's needed. It could be, if we're successful and build a second one, maybe it's something that's used for a company to come into. That is a possibility.
Right. Just one last reference to the gap. I mean, to the, but for, have you identified a gap in financing that this will fill?
Yeah, I mean, it'll help with the numbers to make them more attractive to these companies.
I mean, it make anyone's project more attractive.
Yeah.
Because but I mean, it's
Yeah.
it as being necessary.
They say it's necessary, so I believe it's necessary. So.
Okay.
If it's helpful, back to some of your prior conversation, I think there are some manufacturers in the community that have vendors that they're tasking with maintaining an inventory of supply in the community, not necessarily inventory at the manufacturer, but to support their operations and contract with them. And then for years, the warehousing facilities have been identified as both an opportunity and a need in some of our economic development strategic planning. There's been a lot of conversation about the fact that we're at the intersection of 2 interstates, but we don't have distribution activity. I know there's been conversations with developers of warehousing facilities and trying to inquire why that's the case. Somewhat to Tylen's prior point about the perception of Salina in rural Kansas, some of the feedback we got was, well, you're on I-70, but I-135, you're kind of on the north end. Wichita is a more central location that we're more comfortable in investing in. And so there just wasn't the market. We've seen, Tylen made the point, but we've seen pricing. Our market pricing is not at the levels that they can get in other markets. And then we're starting to see the need more and more in terms of just the need for warehousing facilities for our own manufacturers. So I don't know if that helps with some context, but this has been a conversation that's been ongoing for 10, 15 years, to my knowledge, if not more.
Thank you.
It'd be something I could provide you a list of the buildings we've got and what's in those buildings now. Be glad to do that.
Thank you. I'm done.
Oh, this might be for Mr. Dyer. Trying to picture 240,000 square feet, how this operation is going to work. is it going to be primary flat storage? Will the tenants bring in their own racks, or will it all be set up with racks, and how's that going to go?
So that is also a tax item as well. Some companies like to own their own racking. Some people would require it to be in there, so that could be part of the build-to-suit. It is flat storage, to answer your first question. It'll just be a flat concrete floor, but going vertical will be determinant on what the tenant wants to do, essentially. So we've talked to some who want to go as high as 5 levels on what they store, some that can go over 2, depending on what they're actually using. Due to cost restraints. So as you can imagine, if it's really large structural loads, we're gonna have to go really thick on the concrete floor. It's limiting on the cost, so they would actually spread out as opposed to putting that extra cost into it. And so, sorry, go ahead.
So what would be the capacity going up vertical?
So it's hard to say because each rack could be a different height, right? So it's 32-foot clear height is the total height. So it depends on if you got 4-foot bays or 4-foot height stacks, we can do the math real quick. I think it's 8, but just depending on how those split out. So we have talked to a group that wants to do 5 high, so they're going to be more in that range of probably 6 to 8 feet on the height, but just depends on what they really need and the total loading is how that is. But they will, more than likely, every person or every tenant in here will fill it up with racking of some sort, and they'll be running fork trucks or hand trucks. There could be 100 different ways to get it done, but they will fill it up like that.
So the racks and the equipment, the forklifts will be on the tenants. That'll be their expense.
It could go either way. There's a great program with the state that can help either group through that. And so we are having those conversations with each one of the tenants on how they prefer to go down that path.
Okay. And I see Salina Fire Chief Tony Snyder is on the online there. Have you evaluated water supply and fire protection at this site?
Yes, and so it will be sprinkled. The building will be sprinkled. That's a code requirement. And then we our design firm gathered some stuff on the early end that said that the water pressure is enough to supply that. Of course, that's through the finite design. When we go through the city for approvals, whenever that were to happen, we would verify that information. But I do all that front end to make sure we don't get in a bad spot.
There's a water tower right next door. I just don't know if there's water line.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's plenty of service right next door at Superior. And then Vortex has it just to the south, so we should be fine.
thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Lee. I guess this is for Mitch. You said there's a warehouse shortage space, so, and then you alluded to you have been in, I guess, kind of negotiations, or Superior has, as far as if this is built, they have some tenants that are anticipating using this
Having some
facility?
discussions, yes.
Okay.
So it's not anywhere, firm commitment by any means, but there is some needs for those companies. And we hope, that'll be something that'll be offered, and they'll take advantage of having a new.
And I guess I'll ask you this. I see Mr. Rogers from the Airport Authorities here. Are we full up at the Airport Authority with warehouse space, or could maybe Mr. Rogers address that? Because I know there was.
Again, Mr. Mayor, thanks for a chance to comment. Tim Rogers, Executive Director for the Salina Airport Authority. And I was actually on a phone call at 4 p.m. just as the meeting started with a local industry calling, is there any space? They need 20,000 square feet. And the answer is there is no space available. So at the airport industrial center, and again, what is lacking is this type of facility, and there is space to develop further in the area for the build-out of additional warehouse space like this. This is not, I believe, in my opinion, a one-time build. This fills the need now, and then we work with the developer, work with interested developers and investors to build more of this space. And I think the great advantage is Commissioner Longbond, utilities are in place, water, sewer, streets are all in place. These are shovel-ready sites. So we're taking advantage of city utilities, city improvements that are in place on existing lots that are platted and zoned for this purpose. So there is no space at the airport industrial center. The businesses, I think Mitch explained it very well. We have manufacturers that are requiring supply chain companies to have product or components in place. It's no longer satisfactory to have that product or that component in Wichita and just drive it up here. 3, 4, 6, 7 days worth of items, key to a process to have in place so it can get to the manufacturing line, not that day, but maybe 2 times per day. And also the region. We're now becoming a warehousing logistics location for the region, and not just Salina, but for the communities around us. Again, last comment, this is interstate commerce, and that is the how this project qualifies for the incentives. And I think the but for, just to reinforce, the project doesn't proceed ahead without the incentives. And you'll hear that again in more detail about, it just cannot proceed ahead at this time without that, without the incentive. So thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Just wanted to confirm that you were out of space out there, so. Could someone address the 100%, the abatement compared, we've already done an abatement of 30%. Can somebody walk us through how that's gonna be?
Yes, that's a great question that's been talked about, and our board did discuss that in detail. We had, during that meeting, we had a phone call with Sarah Steele with Gilmore and Bill and said, well, how would we handle that? She said that would be something we could handle very easily, just a matter of basically, we just don't want double dipping, I guess, is how I would describe it. And the company, we've talked about that at the meeting, and they were fine with that as well. So they understood that we would just have to, 13 acres would have to be kind of peeled out of that original project, and we'll just have to work through that.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll turn to our attorney here. That's something those guys do, so.
Yeah, I think the stated intent of the EDO board was to offer, to recommend the exemption less the value of the property tax abatement that's already been received. So you can structure pilot payments in lieu of taxes. We've talked previously today about you can do it in a proportional manner. So we'll work with bond counsel to figure out the value of the property tax abatement that's already been realized and make sure that that's backed
We're,
off.
2-3 years into that 30%? Just one time? Okay. So, okay. Seemed longer. Okay. So,
I did have one more question. Is Superior actually going to operate the facility?
Well, that was something I was talking about earlier. Initially, those 3 jobs are going to would be their positions, but we really don't know, as was being discussed about, each company is going to want to handle that maybe in a different way. Maybe it would be their people, or maybe that would be something that Superior could offer as a added service.
Okay.
So that's really going to depend on.
Are they intending to utilize some of the space?
I don't know. I think you all have got plenty of room right now.
Ms. Carlin says no.
Okay.
okay. Ms. Carlin, I saw you come towards the.
Come on up.
Thank you. Stephanie Carlin with C5 Business Advisors. I want to address Dr. Davis's comment earlier about the but for. We've been speaking rather freely about these tenants, but just to point out that, yes, nothing has been signed. There's been significant interest, but it is all predicated on making sure that we can obtain the necessary tax incentives to help create a lease rate that is more in line with what they're either currently paying or are willing to pay. And so if the commission does approve the 10-year 100% property tax abatement, then that will allow us to pursue the next step, which is to engage in more serious conversations with these prospective tenants. And if they continue to be interested, we would work with them to design the building to meet their specifications. The nice thing about the proposed design layout is it is for multi-tenant use, and whether we have, 5 tenants that have 25,000 square feet of space needed, or one tenant with 150,000 square feet needed, we can design the space and then work with them to understand who will be controlling the inventory and that space. But all of this is very much still in the early stages, trying to work through this process to ensure that we can even meet their needs through obtaining this incentive. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from commission? I will open it to the public. If somebody would like to comment on this subject, please.
Hello, Tracy Wiegert, citizen. I'd like to know what protections are in place for the city. We have promises for a $20 million bond, but will that have to be paid, or is there an out if there's non-performance of signing leases or agreements?
That's a really good question, and it comes up. We tried to address it in the fiscal note. They're commonly referred to as industrial revenue bonds, but the owner buys the bonds and then is responsible for payment of the bonds, and so it's really a structure to make them exempt from taxes. The city doesn't have an obligation or exposure for a bond issue like we would typically do for a city project. So there's two things going on there. With the owner owning the bonds and making the payments, they're responsible to themselves, and then we also have the ability to structure the agreement. If they fail to perform in some way, we can back off the tax abatements for the remainder of the term.
So I guess in short, there's no liability for the city.
Right. It's not a fiscal. The bonds are not a fiscal obligation of the city. It's a mechanism to afford them property tax abatement as well as sales tax abatement on construction materials.
Good question. Any other questions or comments?
Good afternoon, John Blanchard, Salina. First of all, I'd like to commend the EDO, Mitch and the EDO board. Appreciate the work that they do over there. My questions are more around taxpayer, the burden on the taxpayer, and also economic development incentive policy that we do or don't have. So I appreciate the questions that were raised about the but-for and some of the other things. So one question is as this is at the airport, it's a multi-taxing entity project, so Salina taxpayers also pay airport authority taxes. So I want to know, is the IRB the sole incentive on this project, or are there multiple incentives that will be on this project? The second one is, and it goes back to the GASB Statement 77 on disclosures of tax abatements. I don't know if you were given any information in your staff report as to what our current running tally of tax abatements, whether they be IRBs or any other tax abatements that are taking place within the city. Do we have a cumulative look at what the burden on the taxpayer is for all the various tax abatements that we have outstanding? Because as you know, we are an aging community. We have a lot of people on fixed incomes, and ultimately when we don't bring, this is a warehouse, and so we don't have a lot of activity going on out there, but we still have to have fire protection, police protection, the streets need to be maintained and everything else. And all of those ongoing maintenance obligations are the burden of the existing taxpayers, individual property owners, which include both residential and businesses. So my two main questions is, do we have a running total of what the total tax abatements are currently for where we are with everything, and then will this be the sole incentive? Thank you.
I can answer the first question
Ms. Pat?
because
Thank you.
we are required in our annual audit and a comprehensive report to list those. So if you pull out the city's audit from 2021, it will list every tax incentive and neighborhood revitalization rebates, the RBs, anything, any other rebate, any other incentives or taxes that we are foregoing will be listed in that report.
Okay, thank you.
It actually was the second question. I'll ask Mitch if he wants to address. No, go ahead if you want to address the first one.
On the second question, there would be no city or county additional taxes on the local community. If there's any assistance, training programs, that sort of thing, that would have to come from the state level. So, John, the question would be no locally here.
There's. Okay, any other comments? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor Hoppick, I move to instruct staff to proceed with the necessary preparations for the City Commission to initiate industrial revenue bond financing for Superior Contracting and Manufacturing Services Company, structured to provide for property tax abatement equivalent to a percentage to be specified by the City Commission.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor and a second to instruct staff to proceed with the necessary preparations for the City Commission to initiate industrial revenue bond financing for Superior Contracting and Manufacturing Services Company, structured to provide for property tax abatement equivalent to a percentage to be specified by the City Commission. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Okay, that leads us to item 6.6.
Item 6.6, consider Salina Community Economic Development Organization Board of Directors recommendation regarding the City of Salina's participation in the funding of a proposed agreement with SkyWest Airlines and SkyWest Charter for use of the Salina Regional Airport as an overnight maintenance base.
Okay, Mitch.
Bring me a stool up here. Well, we were busy that meeting. The meeting we met with Superior was on the 26th, and we also had a two-prong meeting purpose. And Tim Rogers came and talked to us about this project related to the airport facility. And I'm going to just have a couple of comments, talk about what the board did, and then Tim's going to come up and really give you the real meat and bones of what we're talking about here today. But this is an opportunity that we feel very fortunate to have here in Salina. We talk about infrastructure, we talk about the needs for water, wastewater, electricity, natural gas, highway improvements, transportation, railroad. We've got all those, and currently we've got airport service via Denver and Chicago. And this is an exciting opportunity to potentially, as I say potentially, add a third party to that. I won't say a third party, but a third option. I'll get my wording right here. I want to make sure I say that correctly. So when we go out and talk with companies, air service is always something that's a critical point for companies to talk about. When we were having discussions with Swans about their needs, of course they have a private corporate jet that flies in every so often to drop their people off. Everybody is not in that position. They have to fly commercial. So having this option, again, will be a great opportunity. When we talk about our existing industries, we talk about recruitment of new companies. This is very important. And something that's also important is the recruitment of workers, of workforce, of key critical people that may be working at the hospital, maybe working at one of the colleges. There could be management at one of the facilities. Or in today's world, we're seeing a lot more technical type positions where this equipment that we were talking about earlier, they have to have people be able to run and fix those machines. Some of those folks might fly in here in a different, to service that. I also the two colleges. This is something that could be a very real positive for them. We know Kansas Wesleyan brings students here from all over the country. We don't have a direct service south right now. This could be a real advantage. So I'm pushing this, feel like we have got a good opportunity to expand the services we have here via the airport. On the board of directors met on the 26th. They voted 8-0 to support the recommendation of requesting funds from the city and also from the county. And we'll be attending a county commission meeting in the morning to work with them. This is something that we believe is very important. Several of the board members brought up these same issues, these same critical items that I just mentioned, and they felt like for future service, it was something that would really make a difference in how people are able to fly in here as well as out of here. And at this point, I'm going to let Tim come up, and then if y'all have questions after Tim's done of me, I'll get back up and try and answer those.
Thank you, Mitch. Mayor, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this afternoon to talk to you about an opportunity to finalize, use an incentive, an economic development incentive, different than a manufacturing incentive or a warehouse distribution incentive, but an incentive to finalize an agreement with SkyWest Airlines to start up an overnight maintenance base at the Salina Regional Airport. And I'll mention the overnight maintenance base because that's a tool to use to improve air service, and one that is very unique to communities. Not every community has the ability to do so. First, I just want to set the scene as far as air service and the importance of air service, and it's just not today. Going through some old documents that I like going through, and they're very intriguing and very educational for me. But I thought I'd share with you that this development of air service and the concern about scheduled air service for Salina is not new. On February 7th of 1958, 65 years ago, 19 Kansas mayors and city managers met in Salina, Kansas, to talk about air service and the quality of air service in their communities and across the state. I find it was very interesting that Salina Mayor Ralph Exline chaired that meeting. And Mayor Exline's opening statement was, "We're here to get some united action in order to secure additional airline service." And this comes from the minutes of the meetings. This is, I like people who don't throw things away, and it eventually comes my way, and I get a chance to see what was happening 65 years ago in our community. Other comments from other mayors of those communities that attended were along the lines of, air travel should be sold on the same basis as highways, of necessity as connecting links between cities for trade and industrial purposes. One comment, the Mayor Chanute said, "Get a carrier that wants to serve you and don't let down after you get it." The group at the end of the meeting, is a day-long meeting, resolved the following. Be it resolved that air transportation is vitally essential to the economy, industrial growth, business enterprises, and the welfare of all Kansas communities. So not much has changed. That statement holds true today, 65 years later. So attracting air service, and communities use various strategies and tools to bring new service in. The most prominent lately by communities is called a minimum revenue guarantee. An MRG puts up money for a route, and if the projections and the revenues fall short, the airline just draws the money out of that account, and they pay for the shortfall. MRGs really don't last long, they don't have a longevity, and rarely do they succeed. Currently, a New Mexico community is negotiating with an airline for an MRG for 2 flights a day to Denver. And the cost of that is going to be about $7 million for that minimum revenue guarantee. Other strategies that are used are U.S. Department of Transportation EAS subsidies. That is, the service at Salina is a subsidized service with federal grant funds to the air carrier, not to the community. Other strategy is to use local funds for marketing, advertising, building the market, getting the word out. City of Salina has participated along with the Saline County and the Salina Airport Authority on that. And to date, or since 2018, the city has contributed about $100,000 towards air service marketing. Air service consultant, we have one of the best in the nation, Gary Foss, the ArcStar Group, who ran American Eagle for American Airlines for about 25 years, and is a great resource in helping us develop the service, doing market and catchment area studies and understanding what our opportunities are. It's Gary who really identified the maintenance space as something that we could really kind of aim for and see if we can get SkyWest Airlines interested in that. Communities where an overnight maintenance base is located and is operating benefit from the fact that multiple flights are scheduled to and from that community at numbers that exceed the community's really market, what the market can justify. An example is Springfield, Missouri. 2 daily flights to Chicago. Okay, that's good. They have 6 daily nonstops to Dallas-Fort Worth. They are an American Airlines overnight maintenance base. An aircraft like the CRJ-200 that SkyWest Airlines operates at Salina is by FAA regulations, is required to go into an overnight maintenance base every 3rd night. So what's happening at Springfield, those jets are flowing through Springfield for overnight maintenance, and they need to get back out. And so they're all early morning departures, as best they can, but they start staging those aircraft, and they start departing aircraft until they're all out into the system for the days of flying, then they return at night. Different aircraft, but it flows through. Another example is Abilene, Texas. Same thing. Maintenance base, more flights than they really would normally support. And in these cases, these bases have been in existence since the 1990s. Once the maintenance base is established, it's, according to Gary Foss, who ran them, who set them up with another airlines, they don't go away. They become a normal course of the business of the airline. They become an operating cost. They don't need to be a profit center. They don't need to be profitable. They're just in the cost of doing business, of bringing their jets in for the required FAA maintenance. So we went about thinking, well, how do we get an airline maintenance base? How do we do that? Well, number one, you compete. And I think in all these areas of economic development, we're competing against, I'm not the brightest guy in the world on this, but there's others out there thinking about this too, trying to compete for this. But they don't have our capabilities. So what do we have? The proximity to Denver, Chicago, and Houston. We're right in the middle. It's a strategic location. It's like being on the intersection of two interstate highways. We're at the intersection of multiple airways, aircraft flying above us and going over us. So we do have existing jet service with a carrier, SkyWest Airlines, doing business as United Express. We found that they had a need and a requirement. And so you make sure you pay attention to earning calls. What's the airline talking about? They are doing a lot of maintenance in-house. They have 13 maintenance bases in-house. But in an earnings call last year, they started talking about the need to start to outsource some of their maintenance to third parties. Salina has an MRO facility that SkyWest is already a customer at, and that's One Vision Aviation. SkyWest has 2 jets down there right now. They just passed, Lando last year successfully passed another SkyWest audit, and they were there. SkyWest has an option if they need to expand maintenance, and that is build a brand new maintenance base from scratch. that would require at best, like a $20 million hangar to be constructed to suit. Since we don't have any hangar space, we're out of hangar space too, in addition to warehouse space. Good situation to be in. So we do have the ability to offer. Have you thought about One Vision Aviation, third-party maintenance, and the light starts to come on? But there still is a decision to be made by management, and this is the but for. It will cost, and this is my best guess, and it's tough to get exact information on this level, and especially for a public meeting, but good estimate that the startup costs, the soft costs, the training, the developing, writing the op spec for this operation, that's with the Federal Aviation Administration for this maintenance base, and the internal costs, buying additional ground service equipment to board. We would have 2-3 jets departing each morning, 2 or 3 coming in for maintenance at night. So buying that ground support equipment. So the but for is assistance with that $15 million. The airline is working internally, staff, to convince senior executives that this is the thing to do at Salina, Kansas. And the but for is the assistance that has been identified to get to finalize their decision. It's worth repeating that communities that have airline maintenance bases benefit from the fact that airline maintenance flights to and from are a cost of doing business. The timing is critical. We are at the point where we're ready to, if the incentive can be offered in partnership with the city, the county, and the airport authority, it's time to get them to sign the agreement and commit to this. We'll be meeting with the county commission tomorrow morning for a $400,000 request, $400,000 request here, and the airport authority would wrap everything up with on our February 15th meeting to consider and approve a $100,000 request for the total of $900,000. The agreement, let me touch on that just a little bit to talk about how, and this is changing. This changed a little bit as of 10 a.m. this morning, and we're still working on items and working with City Manager Mike Scragg and others on how we kind of tighten up the agreement to gain some assurances that the incentive does work. First off, it's a one-year agreement. It's a one-time incentive. We're not saying come back and ask for it again. It's a one-time. So how we can tighten this up, and I would recommend that city manager and I work on this along with the county administrator to kind of tighten this up. The agreement would end up in stating that overnight maintenance operations should be underway by December 31st of this year. I think they'll be underway by September 30th of this year. So that'd be one contingency. Second would be that the reimbursement of expenses for the startup don't occur until the startup is in place and the jets are flowing through here. And then big contingency is that the incentive is contingent upon the new EAS program contract being issued this summer. The dates for the bids, for proposals for the renewal of the EAS contract is March 1st. So it'll go fairly quickly, but I think we definitely have a contingency there, and we get back with that. So there's always risk in a project like this, and this is definitely not to be taken lightly as far as the dollars that the community, public funds that would be obligated to this. But the greater risk is losing the United brand in our community. The greater risk is slipping back to the low-quality air service that we had at one time, where we had single-engine turboprop service. The risk is falling back and being just another EAS community, one of 150. And we can take ourselves to a higher level. We can present ourselves in a position where we are getting closer, can move away from the reliance upon the federal subsidy, much like Garden City, Kansas, which has been able to do that over time. So In 2018, we opened up the new era in air transportation scheduled service for Salina by bringing and getting SkyWest Airlines here operating as United Express. When that announcement was made, this statement was included in the announcement. There are few greater contributions to economic development than quality air service. United Express jet service to both Chicago and Denver will increase trade activity to and from Salina and north central Kansas by enabling faster and easier movement of passengers to more locations. Quality air service helps with business recruitment, business retention, and quality of life. Very similar to the words that Mayor Exline used 65 years ago. Thank you for the opportunity to present this opportunity to the City Commission. Be glad to answer your questions that you may have and take any future guidance away.
It's just a one-year deal. Is that right?
It is, because so I'll phrase it this way, if we tell them it's a 2-year deal, then they'll expect money the second year.
Yeah. You know, the shakeup was SkyWest, was it last year? When they cut back out? How many cities are they serving now?
Okay, of the 50 cities they serve as an essential air service community. They serve essential air service communities as United Express and Delta Connection. So that's the 50. So they now have, out of that, they've dropped to about 40 communities that they're still serving as United Express and Delta Connection. Salina was one of 21 communities that were served notices of termination. That notice lasted 60 days, I'm not exact, but we retained the support of United Airlines, who let SkyWest know, SkyWest, we want you to realize of the communities that you issued notices to terminate, that Salina was the top business travel community of all the 21. That notice to terminate was rescinded by SkyWest. There's only one other community in the United States that SkyWest rescinded a notice of termination at, and that was Johnstown, PA. So we are different than the others. We're viewed as different as the others, that there's a market here, and now we're wanting to put ourselves in a unique category as the sole EAS community where they have an overnight maintenance base.
Okay. Are there maintenance sites in-house, all in-house now?
All in-house. So this is
all new.
This is all new, and it is all new. That's part of, okay, how do you get them to finalize the decision to go to third-party maintenance outside?
Right. I just kind of have a issue with using tax dollars to buy airplane parts and different things that go along with it. Is that really what this money's going to go to? Is
It's a possibility, yes.
Initial inventory?
It is a possibility. It is a requirement as they develop their ops specs, to have a certain amount of inventory in place.
And will One Vision stock that inventory?
Yes, separately and away from any other aircraft operator.
And One Vision, I kind of expected they would have a representative here. They assure that they have the capacity?
They do. Jim Sponder and I visited a number of times. We do have the hangar space available for them. They have the capacity, and then they would be able to assign the 3 to 6 workers for the overnight maintenance, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, we talked about whether there was an opportunity for any of the funds to be used for things that the airport authority could retain ownership of.
I mean, that's something city manager and I have talked about, and yes, I mean, if that's a desire, ground service equipment, the airport authority could acquire, lease back to SkyWest, then that would be retained. I mean, a boarding ramp, it's upwards $18,000-$20,000 for a boarding ramp. Ground power units, start carts, ground power units. I mean, those start to add up, especially when you're starting to queue up 3 jets in the morning for departure at 6 a.m., 6:40, and then 7:10, something along those lines.
So these flights, would they come inbound with passengers or empty?
Yes.
They would?
Yep.
But in and out could have passengers or they could go empty?
Well, it depends on who buys the ticket.
Right.
They're going to be sold. They're going to be on, the flights will be entered in a flight schedule and seats purchased on United.com or the Global Distribution System, the GDS. So the difference between a heavy maintenance flight, so Delta flies in their Endeavor RJs here, but they fly in to be in One Vision for 30 days, for 40 days, for a heavy check. The overnight maintenance, again, the aircraft fly in as a scheduled flight, revenue producing, but they're not counting that new revenue for the maintenance flight to justify the flight. They need to get it into maintenance, but they're going to fly it in scheduled because it has to go back out the next morning to get back on the line.
So if they only sell 5 tickets,
It's coming.
that's part of the deal.
The important part is that airplane has to be in for overnight maintenance, or it doesn't dispatch in the morning, and then the dominoes start to fall down, and cascading effect of not having a jet ready to go.
So
Yeah.
that's part of the deal. It's coming here whether it's
Oh yeah.
full or empty.
The only thing that really prevents it, if mechanical, where it's the airport of origin, or weather. That way, they're probably going to take a delay. Crew time, they could time out on crew time. More than likely, there's going to be a spare jet here anyway to get out on the line to replace as this thing builds up.
So this would give us additional flights at additional departures.
Right. The Springfield example, they really, the market that they're in, 2 to Chicago, 2 to Dallas. They have the 2 to Chicago, they have 6 to Dallas. Because all these jets have to be moved through the Dallas hub. The advantage here, we have 3 United hubs that aircraft can flow through on a variety of schedules. And it'll depend on, activity at the hub. Maybe 1 month the schedule may come out instead of just 1 flight to Chicago. We have 2 flights to Chicago. May reverse the maintenance demands out of the Denver hub, may shift the 2 flights out of Denver, one Chicago, and then maybe they have to start flowing jets through from Houston. So, but it's going to be, we're not going out and buying that service with public funds like communities are doing with an MRG.
Okay, thank you.
I actually have a question looking at it from a customer service perspective. Just kind of reading between the lines, especially this day and age with, you travel, you get left high and dry in an airport. If you're a maintenance hub, your likelihood of getting left out in the cold, so to speak, is lower. Is that a safe assumption to make?
It is.
Okay.
There's a priority to get that jet in for maintenance so it can be back on the line the next morning.
So I definitely see that as a selling point. The flight to Houston, is it safe to assume it's going to be a nonstop, or is it going to stop off at
All these
Dallas?
are the schedule that is being discussed, and is nonstops. Denver, Chicago, Houston, break the tag at Hayes.
Excellent.
So getting back to all nonstop flights. It's hard to operate a maintenance flight if you got to stop at a tagged city. The priority is to get the aircraft in from the hub to the overnight maintenance base so it can be ready to, there's a risk that you get stuck in Hayes. And it's 90 miles away. It's supposed to be here, which has happened. So, anyway.
Understood. Now, I've been left in Oklahoma City. I've been left in Dallas. Coincidentally left in Sacramento recently, but that was a story in of itself. But honestly, I like what I hear in terms of the customer service facet of this. quite a bit.
There is another aspect of customer service. Just a moment, TSA is bringing in new automation into the airport terminal building. So it's being installed later this month, early next month, is a new, for the passenger screening, a new automated device to scan, a body scan, and new device to scan check bags to expedite. And not going to say this was all because of the possibility of an overnight maintenance space, but there's some things coming together for Salina and our scheduled air service that certainly is converging at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Look to my left. Write the check.
No questions. I think it's an exciting opportunity.
I have several questions. One, these will be One Vision jobs, and do we know, will these be new employees or will these be employees that are reassigned?
You're probably existing staff, and there's a benefit to One Vision. It really helps them fund a third shift. So do the checks overnight on the SkyWest jets. And then also it enables that crew, those 3 to 6 initially, to prep and get ready for the morning shift to come on board. And so it does help fund a third shift and gives that presence out there.
Where are these planes that will be coming into Salina? Where are they currently being serviced out of?
Well, there's maintenance bases. This is there's one maintenance base in Oklahoma City that they've run through Colorado Springs, of course, Denver and Chicago. But the problem is when SkyWest and the EAS community jet shows up at one of the larger maintenance bases there, it's like take a number, and it's not number 1 or number 2. It's and go stand at the back of the line. So SkyWest, for the EAS small rural community air service, they want to improve the maintenance response by controlling this through the third party. So those are the Denver, Chicago, Oak City are maintenance, and there's still about 10 others.
So initially, we would expect 3 jets in here
Right.
per evening. Now, would those be maintenance out of the One Vision
Yes.
hangar, or is there another hangar they would use?
There's another hangar. It depends upon space. The airport authority has still space in hangar 600 that we're holding back for this. Depends on how we finalize any negotiations. Maybe SkyWest wants a dedicated hangar and that's possible. We're also in the process of finishing the design, and we'll be bidding the rehabilitation of hangar 626, which gives another capability to move the overnight
Yeah,
maintenance.
because I guess my concern was that One Vision, from everything I hear, is already extremely busy. And
Right.
do they have hangar space for 3 per night?
They do. And between the space they have now and the space that we can provide them an additional lease space for that, there is room for that.
So the Salina to Houston flight, is that a fact or is that an assumption that if this happens?
In a public meeting, the way I can best answer the question is that the overnight maintenance space, the plan is that jets would fly through Salina from all 3 hubs that are SkyWest operates as United Express, Denver, Chicago, and Houston. But that schedule that's the proprietary part of this that SkyWest does not want to reveal yet, because it's also needs to be coordinated with United. You need gating agreements with United still have to be finalized. If Houston is added, there's a whole new fare structure that has to be built just up between Salina and Houston. The fare structure for all the destinations, all the connections out of Houston, has to be developed in coordination with United. So that's a heavy lift. That's also where some of the behind-the-scenes work would be reimbursed for some of that work.
And so when approximately would the Houston flight, or is that a good question?
How about additional flights? When would they be seen? It would be, the objective is the summer of '23. And that means that stating that the maintenance space is up and running, by expectation this summer, but by a date no later than 12/31 is reasonable. They need to have this up and running. Their objective is, and the exact date can't give you, but it is summer of '23.
So, and again, one of the questions I had, and I think you answered it, I just want to verify, is that SkyWest's contract is up this summer, that we go out for rebid.
Right, the request for proposals are due from interested air carriers on March 1st. So as mayor, you'll be copied in, along with the city manager and myself, on those proposals that come in. And SkyWest will be submitting a proposal
They will, okay.
for Salina. So I think we go through that and we look at this, and that's why we, Mike and I have talked about it. It's contingent upon SkyWest being awarded the new EAS contract for Salina.
Okay, well, I'm a little bit with Mr. Longbine. A one-year agreement kind of bothers me. I'm not sure that that you know, I understand, you know, and I understand that it has some significant benefits to the community. And as I looked at this and I was trying to wrap my head around it and again, without seeing a copy of the agreement, which doesn't sound like it's been finalized, you know, I feel like we're putting a lot of trust in you and that we hope you're reading the tea leaves correctly is what it kind of comes down to.
Term, also think about that EAS contract. The EAS contract is going to be a minimum of 2, if not 3 years. They're currently operating under a 3-year contract. So think of the term as just for the term limiting the use of the incentive. Don't drag it out. Get this thing set up and get it operating. When you see the proposal from SkyWest, it should be a minimum of 2, most probably 3 years. That's their commitment to the community through that EAS subsidy contract. So there's a connection there as far as a sense of.
And their proposal could be Chicago, could be Denver, could be Houston. We'll see what they propose.
Their proposal, and since we're looking at tea leaves here, so.
That's.
Their proposal.
I'm the one spending the money, so I'd like to hear more tea leaves if I could.
Their proposal will be for Denver and Chicago. So for the EAS federal subsidy.
Okay.
Any other flights related to the maintenance, overnight maintenance, will come in outside of the EAS subsidy, but it will be communicated to the community as far as when they will be added and when they'll be operating. And it can, again, could vary. The scenario, 1 month, 2 out of Denver instead of 1, another month, 1 or 2 out of Houston, depending upon the maintenance schedules and the demands of this CRJ 200 fleet.
Okay. Any other questions?
I had one more. Would these flight crews be staying overnight?
Yes. The way this works, it has to be, it's called a RON flight or remain overnight. A lot of acronyms in this industry. But a RON flight, and we had a RON flight previously. And COVID and pilot shortage, so that's why we got the goofy schedule we have now. And this returns a schedule to really meet the needs of most travelers. Out early out in the morning, at least this area, out in the morning, get back at night. And I think Rob Exline made the comment at the EDO meeting. He has 3 trips coming up, and the current schedule at Salina doesn't help him. Get it back to a morning departure, Denver or Chicago or another hub, then he's good to go. And we are interested in and have been in developing the Houston hub. We present a lot of information, market information to SkyWest on Houston. It makes a lot of sense because of Xline, their work in the oil fields, here and down there. Schwann's has another facility in Houston. I think they would be using it. So I think we got the numbers that show the demand is there. So this is a way, again, a tool, a strategy, rather than using a cash MRG.
I understand the timeline. I just flew south and we flew out of Wichita at 6 a.m. and then flew back and got into Wichita about 9:30, I think was when the flight. So that's kind of the
maybe that
you're talking.
That type of schedule.
Okay, any comments or questions from the public?
try one. Tracy Wiggert, citizen. I'm an idea guy, and I'm hunting big game. And I'm thinking that military aviation can benefit from the city of Salina, because if, let's say they want to refuel a tanker, they have to go to McConnell, and there's only one vendor. There's no competition for price. Salina could provide that competition. There's also, we got the bombing range. Planes can fly in, clean. Refuel, rearm here in Salina, $20 million a rearm. Go back out to the bombing range and have some fun. You know, maybe we should be thinking about these. This could be good income for the city, very good income. And I don't see any effort in those areas. Yeah, the jets are noisy, but the money's nice too. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question. I think I have the answer to the question. The Salina community, in partnership with the Salina Chamber and all the partnership here, we have been working actively and do work actively to bring military activity to this community. We are known as a forward operating location. In fact, there's a team of our FBO, F-Flight, and Salina Airport Authority, Salina Chamber. They're actually going to a conference to the military units that are planning exercises for the rest of this year and really into next year. So to answer the question, just last year, we had activity that brought to our community in 2022 cash, hotels, meals, rental vehicles, hotels, direct cash impact of $5.2 million. That was some 1,100 members of the military that were here. 2 major exercises that were here, and the aircraft and the fuel, all of that. That is the military. On the civil side, we had a direct impact of about $936,000 of civilian events here using the airport. And so appreciate the comment, and I'm sure we're working on it, and we'll continue to bring more of that in so we have those benefits to the restaurants, the hotels, and bring those dollars into the community. Hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, I appreciate your comments on this. And Mayor Hoppick, I agree that that's an awful lot of money. And when you say it's your money, I know what you mean, but I know you mean that it's the taxpayers' money. It's not your money. But it is. So I have a number of things, and I'll just pick up where I left off last time with, I think it'd be really helpful if we had a codified economic development incentive policy so that we can kind of have a rubric and judge incentive requests against what the but-fors and also community benefit. One thing I heard here was that there was a couple of things. One is that I heard Springfield, Missouri, and I heard Abilene, Texas. Springfield, Missouri has a metropolitan statistical area of 475 people. Abilene, Texas, probably around
175,000.
475,000.
Yeah, you said 475. So.
It's like those columns, adding thousands.
Yes.
We're at about 61,000, so I'm not quite sure what the demand is. Also, the request is for SkyWest Airlines /charter, and I know that for Canada Region Jet, which have a 50-seat capacity, with the charter version, do they carry full 50 passengers, or have they cut back because of the rules for charters versus the airlines? So that goes towards the demand. As far as the 1 year and the $900,000 investment, if I heard correctly, it's $400,000 from the city, $400 from the county, $100 from the airport authority. What, since this is to benefit the biggest beneficiary of this is One Vision Aviation, what is their skin in this game? So those are some of the things I'd like to have answered. as far as, and then it kind of goes also to the incentive. Is this thing going to be, how are we funding this? What is the funding source? Is it coming out of the general fund, just a cash payment? Because I just want to bring everyone back because of the 1 year concern. I want to bring back everybody back to around 2011, 2012 when the Economic Development Incentive Council was around. We gave Phillips $900,000, and in the end they said they added 22 jobs, turned around and got rid of 22 jobs, and so where did our money really go? So I think I don't like that we have such big requests that come up that aren't talked about in the budgeting process, and I think that you guys share that concern. At least that's the impression I got from your questions. Thank you.
And I will look at staff. I did have a question that I'd forgot to ask about where the dollars were coming from. So if you could address that first.
My one contribution to the staff report was in the fiscal note, and the EDO talked about this as well. As you know, we allocate 3.9% of the special sales tax proceeds to the Economic Development Fund. We talked earlier about segregating different funds. 3.9% is set aside for Economic Development Fund, and that maintains an ongoing balance. We pay the EDO annually $275,000. We pay the Salina Downtown Inc. $60,000, and then we funded for the 2022 year, 2023, $60,000 to SDI Facade Grant Program. Our historical activity in terms of sales tax has been in the 350 to 380 range. In 2022, it was $423,000. So there's $395,000 of expense compared to $423,000 of proceeds in 2022, which was a good year. So that's $28,000 of net benefit to the balance of that reserve fund. You may recall that we paid $600,000 cash incentive to Schwann's out of that fund, and so you authorized a transfer from the sales tax fund balance directly into the Economic Development Fund of $750,000. So at the moment, the approximate balance of the Economic Development Fund is $898,000, but when you account for our known commitments annually and our estimated revenue annually, we net at the moment about $28,000. The bulk of that balance is because of that transfer from the special sales tax fund. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. There is balance in the fund to make the $400,000 contribution, but at the moment, regardless of requests for cash incentives, that 3.9% allocation essentially covers the annual expenses we've committed to.
And when does that get replenished?
Well, from a sales tax standpoint, we receive it on a monthly basis and distribute it. If you're talking about the $750,000, that was just a discretionary allocation, somewhat in recognition of the recent funding of Schwann's.
That fund receives dollars every month.
Yep.
Okay. So I guess if we spend this now, we don't have it available for something that comes down the road is what we have to be
Similar
aware of.
conversation we had with Schwann's, and recognizing, not knowing what the request might be, but recognizing that another request just seemed likely as we talked about the allocation of the fund balance within the special sales tax fund to itemized funds, you authorized that $750,000 transfer.
Yeah. Another way to look at it, though, is if you don't spend the money now, I think we lose a valuable opportunity to dig a deep toe hole in keeping SkyWest and commercial aviation here. It's one of those quality of life things. Libraries need money. They don't generate a lot of funds, but you support libraries because it's what people expect to have in a city of this class. Air service, it's a plum. It sets us apart from other cities, and businesses look favorably on Salina with good air service. I just see it as it's not a yearly allocation. It's a one-time wager that this is going to be really good for our economy and our quality of life here for a lot longer than 3 years. I just, it's a bad way to give an analogy, but we spent a lot more and gotten a lot less than what we're going to get out of this. And a lot of folks been, if we can get service to Houston, even if the schedule fluctuates a little bit, it's better than the service we have to Houston right now, which is none. And in the wintertime, flying to Houston's a whole lot better than flying to Denver or Chicago, because you can get anywhere in this country from Houston. So I just don't see us really on the losing end of this.
I agree completely with Commissioner Davis. In fact, during the presentation, the entire time I was thinking of the term jumpstart, just kind of essentially that's what this is doing to kind of
It's a good term.
invigorate this process, and hopefully, the ball gets rolling and it doesn't stop.
Okay, anyone else?
Well, I can see, we have 3 pretty major international corporations here in the region. And I'm not sure where your Asian flights generally come in, what hub they come into, but the Houston connection would be a nice addition, nice option. But like you said, it is a gamble. And
Picking a football winner is a gamble. I think this is a fairly reliable, educated assumption that it's more likely than not. The airline's going to be here for at least 3 years anyway. I mean, the business is good here, which it has been, and they enjoy having their planes serviced here. I don't think they would make a willy-nilly decision to just junk it all. But someone would know that better than me, so that's just my opinion.
it's coming from the guy commissioner that flies coast to coast frequently.
And there's nothing more reassuring than knowing your plane has been worked on the night before you got on it. I want you to
Okay. If there's no other comments, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
If the mayor is ready for a motion, I would move that we approve a motion accepting the concurring with the SCEDO recommendation, authorizing the reallocation of $400,000 of economic development funds to provide the city's portion of the contribution to the project as recommended, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the use of such funds.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept and concurring with the SCEDO recommendation, authorizing the reallocation of $400,000 of economic development funds to provide the city's portion of the contribution to the project as recommended, and C, authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the use of such funds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes. Good luck. Okay, that brings us to development business, which we have none. Other business, only thing I have is all of you should have received a board appointments questionnaire. There's quite a few in there. I think those are due back to me by next Monday. So if I could get those, that would be helpful so I can get them forwarded on to the city clerk. Okay, with that, we'll move to citizens forum.
This will be real quick. Thanks, John Blanchard. Several months ago, I attended a rezone meeting for River Run and had forwarded some paperwork to the city manager. Is there anything that is new from that? Because at the annual meeting of the Planning Commission, they said that it was reported that things have been worked back and forth between the developer and the city, but nothing has been submitted yet. So,
yeah, that's an accurate assessment. I know there's been conversation. I know there's been some identification of options. I can't speak for the developer, but there's been dialogue trying to move it forward.
okay. Has there been any determination made as to whether or not the existing plat meets the fire code.
Yeah, as we bring it all forward, we've gone through the code requirements, the timeline, the history. The intent is to report all that out as background as well as the proposed approach.
Okay. Another planning type thought too, and this kind of goes along. I read, after the last meeting, I went and read the RFP that went out for the housing thing. And one of the things that I kind of was reading through, it sounded like we were going to wait until somebody came with a piece of property and then we'd go through the planning and zoning steps with that. Is that, I mean, I'm assuming that's a fairly accurate representation of what it is. And I know a comment was made at the county commission meeting last week that we didn't want to get in a situation where you had whoever the successful person was on the RFP come in and have any conditions where it might look like contract zoning. So I got to thinking, what are the possibilities, and preferably this might have happened before the RFP went out, but what is the possibility of, it's happened in other jurisdictions that I'm aware of, I assume it's applicable here. Can the City Planning Commission not petition as the Planning Commission to have an annexation and rezone? Can they not initiate that? So that, and my reason is so that if the Planning Commission petitions that and starts taking action on the parcels that you definitely are thinking about having done, you can hold your second, you can go through that whole process, get it all done, hold the second readings in advance, and if nothing ever happens on them, then it never takes effect. But it just seems to me that there's a way that we can kind of get whoever the successful person on the RFP is, we can kind of get them moving forward without knowing who it is, but knowing where we want to have that the potential of that property or properties. So I would just invite you to maybe consider, before you finalize all of the RFP process and everything, having this Planning Commission petition for those actions so we can help whoever the developer is and help with the housing if this moves forward to kind of get those rolling. So,
Thank you.
thanks.
And I'll give a brief update on the housing RFP. The submission deadline was last Friday. We actually received 13 submissions, and so got quite a bit to go through. We have an identified timeline. We are trying to anticipate some of the planning and zoning issues, but given that timeline, I don't know that we can that we can make much headway in terms of the proposed approach. We're just going to have to assess the proposals we've received, and we'll be shortlisting them. We'll be conducting interviews. We'll be coming back to the City Commission with a summary and a recommendation, and then we'll have to negotiate with the identified respondents to the project, as well as the variables associated with zoning and property acquisition that might apply to their proposal. Ideally, there's the more typical example is the city owns the ground, it's zoned, everything's in place, and you're targeting a particular piece of property. Given our circumstances, not owning ground, we had to take a little bit of a different approach.
Norman Mantle, Salina, Kansas. I've attended 3 meetings in the last 2 weeks, one in Wichita, one here in Salina, and it concerns water issues. Can you guarantee these businesses here in town 10 years of water from now? We're running out of water. The wells are already being shut down. So you can't guarantee these people water. The state is going to shut them down. Other issues. These permits that have been issued for our water should have never been issued. That is a statement from a state representative. We are overpumping our waters. You're not going to have water for these businesses here in 10 years. That was stated at the Commodity Classic and at the meeting I attended in Wichita. So what are you going to do to fix that? If they run out of water, you ain't got anything. I've heard a lot of stuff said in here today, but most of it is voodoo economics. At the beginning of each meeting that I've attended, there's a public forum, both at the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting. Why can't we have it here to accommodate the citizens? They can address it from both ends. The guy comes here early, he doesn't have to wait. The guy comes here late, he can address it at the end of the meeting. I mean, it's right here about the water. Is the city prepared, this was discussed at these two meetings, is the city prepared to provide security for our substations in this town? We can take them out. Now, I built these substations over 40 years ago, and I knew they were a problem. You can't protect them. You can't put containments around these substations. You've got to have air circulation. Is the city going to provide security? No. You can't do it. Look at these substations up here on these interstates. We've got a bigger problem that we better fix before we start looking at home. And you commissioners are letting this happen.
Anyone else? Okay, if not, I will accept a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we'll see you next week.